This video has been developed as a learning resource to prompt your thinking, ideas, and to inspire so that you can bring your thoughts and questions to our webinar on February 23rd, where you will have the opportunity to connect with other VSN educators and collaborate. I'm Jacqueline Stevens, Research Scholar and Professional Learning Designer at the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation. The following content has been collected based on my experience as both an educator and instructional coach, as well as the current research available in the field of education. When viewing this resource, know that there will be opportunities to pause this video and stop to reflect. We highly encourage you to not view this resource in one sitting, but to view each section individually. Stop to take notes, capture questions, and come ready to collaborate with other Virtual School Network educators during our synchronous webinar. At any time, feel free to stop, review slides, take a closer look at content, and be sure to refer to the resources that are highlighted along with this learning video. Brain science. Our brains allow us to learn, see, remember, hear, perceive, understand, and create language. Sometimes the human brain also fails us when it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Cognitive psychologists study how people acquire, perceive, process, and store information. As educators, understanding a bit about how the brain works will help us plan and design, as well as connect and grow in our craft. All information comes in through the senses. Taste, touch, smell, hearing, seeing. We are bombarded with information at all times. In order to survive, our brain only takes note of certain parts of the information that is all around us. Plus, our brain really seeks pleasure in patterns. Our sensory register is the brain's bouncer. The sensory register is always working, looking for pleasure in patterns to send further into the brain, moving from our sensory registry and working memory, hopefully, to long-term memory. Since the sensory register is bombarded with information, it makes quick decisions based on survival as a number one priority. The brain loves patterns, and one way our brain has adapted to ensure our survival is to prioritize changes in patterns. A change in a pattern can mean danger. It can mean something exciting. It could be something we're thinking about when we wake up at night, startled because the power's gone out, or there's been a change in the ambient sound that wakes us up and causes us to be concerned. Once your brain rules out a threat, however, it is interested in a pattern change. It's a novelty. Your sensory register sends novelty information deeper into our brain. So what does this mean for educators? What happens to the information the sensory register decides is not pleasure or pattern, or a change in pattern? So if information does not get dumped at the sensory register, it reaches the emotional switching station called the amygdala. For information to pass through the amygdala successfully, the brain cannot be in a state of high stress. In a state of high stress, information that enters the amygdala will be directed to the lower brain, which will react in an involuntary fight, flight, or freeze reaction. In this state, information is less likely to pass to the prefrontal cortex for higher order thinking, nor can information or executive function guidance be easily retrieved. Our goal is to move from sensory registry, that it does not get rerouted to a fight, fly, or freeze response, but that it goes to short-term or working memory. This is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is where short-term memories are formed. Once there, new information must connect with relatable information if it is to be considered and ultimately retained as a long-term memory. The hippocampus likes new information to be known. So why does that matter to educators? Once information is in our working memory, our brains take about 15 seconds to determine if it will keep or forget that new information. So what information is going to stick with our students? And what information is just going to be trashed? Our working memory has two choices: to leave the info or to trash it, because it neither is considered irrelevant or it lacks some kind of connection to a past learning or an experience that student will have. But our hope as educators, however, is that the working memory chooses to love the information received because it finds it relevant, connects it to past learning, connects it to experiences, and or that this new information evokes an emotional response. Working memory has two major limitations: capacity and processing. It's just a fact of life. But if the information passes that initial test, our brain begins to work with that new information, to build, to take apart, to rework, analyze it, exactly what we as educators want to happen in our students' brains. Do you remember the brain's primary function? That's right, it's survival. Our 3-pound brain uses 20% of the body's metabolic resources. So our survival programming as humans is designed to preserve our limited resources. So it's not surprising that a lot of information never makes it to working memory. Our goal as educators is to pass that test, for the brain's beginning to work and to take that higher level thinking to the next phase. So as educators, we want to design lessons where the information is going to stick, where the information is going to be loved and processed in that working memory for as long as possible. And the longer it stays in the working memory, the more likely it's going to be transferred to long-term memory. And that long-term memory, that information can stay in there for minutes, hours, months, years, or indefinitely. Think about the things that you learned in middle school that you still clearly remember today. But of course, if that information is not used or practiced, it's going to fade over time. Our brains and our students' brains are working the way they are designed to. The number one job of our brain is to survive. To reduce the load and increase the odds of survival, the brain has these several mechanisms to prevent learning. It's how we're wired, unfortunately. But our knowledge of the brain's functions help us as educators design lessons that help students develop those long-term memories that we call learning. And understanding how the brain takes in and processes this information can help us plan instruction, plan learning experience that help all students, and really advance student engagement overall. At this time, take a moment to pause, take notes, capture questions, and really think about what you want to talk about when the opportunity to talk with other virtual school network educators is going to happen in February. Strategies to promote engagement. There are so many. The strategies for engagement really come down to 4 key components: how you structure content for meeting and authenticity for your learners, how you personalize instruction based on what you know about your students, and using the resources you have to facilitate flexible learning choices to connect students to the content and the learning. Finally, making the most of connecting with students on their progress with focused and targeted feedback. Being strategic about what you do synchronously versus asynchronously can have a major impact on student engagement. Consider using your synchronous time for checking in with students, conferencing, working in small groups to offer connection and your ability to be very responsive. Asynchronous class time should focus on short lessons, opportunities to give instruction, doing demonstrations, and modeling using video or, for example, reading aloud and sharing writing for peer feedback and review. This structured time offers flexibility and your learner's ability to rewatch, reread, and review content for clarity. There are 3 types of interactions that should be sustaining your virtual learning and engagement. Virtual education is not simply a geographical separation of learners and teachers, but more importantly, a pedagogical concept. For effective learning and retention, you need interaction. This is what makes the experience more worthwhile and valuable for your learners. Learner to learner. Social interaction is so important. Don't just encourage your students to share their insights. Create a learning atmosphere where they can participate, offer response, draw effective feedback, and communicate in short, focused messages. This fosters powerful relationships among students and allows them to better understand your material. Learner to content. This is the most crucial form of interaction since this is where learning takes place. Achieve this type of interaction by giving students options on how they want to consume content. Offer content in different formats, including text, audio, or video. Give them breaks or quizzes to check for understanding. Moreover, consider creating challenging tasks that require students to interact with the content and explore the topic in greater detail. Simulations, web searches, scenarios, case studies, all of these demand participants to interact with the content and learn more about the topic on their own. This will increase engagement. Learner to learner instruction. Increase the dialogue between you and your students. This could be by phone, virtually, and written notes. This is just such a crucial component. But it does require monitoring the students' performance and participation and focusing primarily on timely and prompt feedback from the educator. When we think about our lesson plans, we also want to consider that structure to be short, breaking our content into small chunks for virtual consumption. For example, this model, connect, teach, engage, link. So starting off your lesson by, today I'm going to teach you, and connecting students with the why. Why is this important? Following by a model. Watch me, then I'll have you try this. Showing students what it's going to look like in the learning experience in the virtual setting. Then giving students an opportunity to practice, to engage on their own, or in small groups. And finally, linking that learning, saying things like, as you work, remember, giving them reminders and feedback as you go. Notice where it focuses on you, the educator, and on your students. We also want to consider how we flow with our lessons or structure these mini lessons in our virtual content. All of this is going to help us make clear connections for our students. As you can see here is another model of simple lesson design structure. We start with you, the educator, the teaching moment, introductions, hello, how are you? Provide an overview of what to expect from the learning experience for that lesson. The format can be in a virtual meeting space or maybe a pre-recorded video. Some of you may have to send materials home. And, that first step is just so vital for students. They do benefit from seeing you, even if it's by video or by virtual means, hearing your voice, seeing your face, and using that opportunity to connect. Then your connection to them will then support their connection to the content you want to share. This may be directing students to content you want them to access or explore, like anything in formats of text or video, simulations, tours, audiobooks, virtual field trips, reading and resources. It's an endless list. But from there, consider collaborative opportunities for your students to engage in the content. Virtually, it may be with other students. Maybe this is a challenge that they can accomplish with a family member or in small groups. The format can be verbal discussion, collaborative documents or notes in the virtual space, video. There's really lots of opportunities for choice. The goal is to connect that content to the demonstration of learning through collaborative opportunities. When it's time for students to demonstrate their learning, we want to provide students with those opportunities to show us what they've learned using a method of options or choice boards, for example. Formats can be digital uploads, such as visual images, photos, videos, slides, text, but multiple options for demonstrating understanding demonstrates learners' variability and increases motivation as well. And then it comes back to you, the educator, the feedback loop, the check for understanding, and that connection matters. And when we just go on repeat, you can see the cycle of our simple lesson design. And of course, connection gets easier when we know more about our students, when we ask them to tell us about themselves. And there's multiple ways to make this happen. In your resources, there are some examples highlighted, such as student surveys, heart mapping activity, and an activity called Outer Shell Inner Swirls. These example templates have instructions that correlate and will help you create opportunities to gather data from your students to inform both your practice and your instruction in an effort to personalize your learning for your students. One of the easiest things, however, within our control as educators is how students are accessing content. Content is what the students need to know, or how they will get the information we want to teach them. And while the content for all students may need to remain consistent, how students access this information can be differentiated and personalized, as well as flexible. We are probably using a learning management system and housing that content into one central location, offering opportunities for students to access videos and visuals, as well as different sorts of media instead of just having them read text. Also, as educators, we want to provide a variety of content and specific resources for students to engage with. So readings, blogs, websites, videos, really allowing those students to choose what they want to read, what they want to watch. And one of the easiest tools to do this are things like choice boards or playlists. These are guided resource repositories offering flexible choice within the teacher's control. You add in the content you want, making sure that it's all aligned to your goals, to your objectives and standards, and the students have that flexibility to choose where they want to go, what they want to learn, and when they want to learn it. Task cards are also a really helpful way to use virtually. You can create your own cards using a tool such as Google Slides and getting students to navigate through their learning in that way as well. These flexible choices allow students to express their knowledge in different ways and to have a sense of control over their learning. It also can provide opportunities for them to engage with multiple types of media in your lesson material. We also want to consider how students are creating products to demonstrate their own learning and to provide some personalization and flexibility here as well. Are we allowing students to collaborate? Are we assigning products and demonstrations of learning that mirror real world, perhaps career-specific tasks? And are we allowing students flexibility in how they choose to show us what they've learned? Does everyone have to write the same paper? Or can some students choose to write while others choose to create a video or demonstrate their learning in a three-dimensional visual? It's all about giving opportunities to our students, knowing that the end goals may not all look the same, but we can understand what the students have learned, and thus them taking ownership in their choices are improving engagement. I wanted to highlight for you how easy this can really be. This is what I call my mini lesson mix and match matrix, and I use this matrix to help me plan my lessons. So there are my must-haves in that left-hand column. I need to be clear about what I want my students to get from the lesson or the resources so that I can move from my teacher-led instruction to more student-led opportunities. So first, I want to model exactly what to do. I want to give my teaching points or my instructions perhaps verbally in writing or in a video, and I give my students an idea of how much time they should spend on this learning task in my mini lesson, encouraging them to set a timer if need be. So the idea here is that numbers 1 through 3, engage, do, and share, never change. That is the structure of my mini lesson. But the options A, B, and C, can be mixed and matched for the virtual learning needs. My goal, again, is to keep it simple, but also offer differentiation and flexibility for my students as appropriate. For students who need more time and or do not have prior experience with digital tools that I'm using, I might just stick with option A. Option B highlights strategies with the recommendation that students have some prior experience with the digital tools that I want to use. And if they do not have that experience using these, plan on making or sharing clear instructions for their use. In option C, where it is the most student-led practices highlighted, this is best implemented when the students have some previous experience creating or practicing in more independent learning strategies. So depending on what I know from my class, the data I've collected, the information I have, and the lesson I've designed, I can mix these up. But I will always do engage, do, and share. But the options can be more and more focused on students given experience and time. So let's look at an example of how this can work. So in this example, again, engage, do, share. It hasn't changed, but I am mixing up my options. The great thing here is that this is very flexible. The examples and the matrix are located in the resource list along with this learning resource, and it will give you time to really dig in and see how the highlighted examples can be changed and shifted based on your comfort and the comfort of your students and what their needs are. Learning activities and experiences are mixed and matched, and in this example, students use instructional videos as models with a prompt to try the lesson on their own. Then during synchronous class time, students are given the opportunity to demonstrate their learning and to get feedback both from me, their teacher, and their peers. In this example, we have mixed and matched again, giving students the opportunity to watch a short video with the instructions from me, their teacher. Then they're prompted to create something new. Lastly, in the share, students are encouraged to demonstrate their learning in a method of their choice to get peer feedback. Again, these examples are highlighted in the resources attached to this video. And this tool is not just helpful for me in planning my mini lessons. I can also flip it and give this to student as a choice board to create an engaging lesson of choices for them. So here we have an example of a customizable student choice board. Students are all expected to engage with the material from me, their teacher, but how they engage, what they do with that information, and how they share it back to me is going to be different depending on the options they pick. Maybe they'll stick with option A all the way through. Maybe they'll pick option A for engage, maybe option C for do, and option B for share. But it's up to them. Maybe they have to play tic-tac-toe with this board. Maybe I assign students probably a color code and I know what they need to have for enrichment or for some deeper learning experiences. And maybe students have to complete a column based on groupings I already already create or small groups that I put them in. So this can be a super helpful way for formative assessment, or maybe I leave it wide open for my students to choose where they want to go and how they want to engage. The point is that they're engaged, they're motivated, and they have some ownership of their learning. Now, let's talk a little bit more about feedback before we move on. Feedback is essential to make and foster connections with students, and it can look a lot of different ways. One thing I really like to do is schedule one-on-one time with my students and their families to check in and discuss progress. I can focus on what the student has accomplished. I can ask the student what they're struggling with, and maybe identify just one area to discuss so the conversation stays positive. We could talk about strategies and techniques or guidance that can provide help to improve their learning. And I can also talk about, the responsibilities that the students have and what role they want to play in their learning and what role I can play to support them. So really just creating opportunities to talk. And it really helps to have families on the other end of that conversation, depending on the age of your student. When you're working virtually, you want to have your families on board. Not only does the student get to connect with you, but the families get to understand who you are as well and become a support structure. And if you haven't seen the single point rubric before, it is an incredibly handy tool. A single point rubric is a very simple way for me as a teacher to highlight the criteria that I'm looking for when I assess my students. It is easy for me to then write notes to the student or perhaps the family for where I think there could be areas to grow or areas for improvement. And when I see that my students are exceeding effort, I can highlight that as well. What does that evidence of exceeding and excellence look like? So in your resources that are attached to this video, there are articles and examples of what this can look like. It is a very simple method for students to understand what their target is. I can highlight those bright spots. I can highlight feedback, and I can keep it simple and concise versus giving them a large rubric or a matrix. For example, 1 through 5, when really I just want them to focus on the 4s and 5s and not know what it takes to get a 1. You know what I mean? So thinking about how to use rubrics for our feedback is also going to streamline our processes and give our students something to look forward to and help that engagement. So again, feedback gives us the space to reflect on those strengths and those weaknesses, those challenges, and how we can continue to support students and open the channels of communication so that they can advocate for themselves. This doesn't place boundaries on our students' performance. It doesn't work against students' tendencies to rank themselves or compare themselves or compete with one another, but it does help students take the attention off of their grades and focus on learning. It creates more flexibility without sacrificing clarity. And it's just plain simple. This section had a lot of information, so I do hope that you take time to pause, take notes, capture questions. What's resonating with you? What do you think would be helpful to improve and support your practice as a virtual educator? And please consider writing things down so you can come ready to collaborate with other virtual school network educators during our synchronous webinar. Motivation. There are two types of motivation. Extrinsic motivation happens when you're motivated by a specific reward or an outcome. For example, studying hard for a test because you primarily care about that grade. However, once the pressure of the test grade's gone, your motivation to learn or remember that content may diminish. Intrinsic motivation is a personal why you do something. It comes from within. It's your personal drive, but that also requires grit, the passion and sustained persistence applied towards long-term achievement, with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. Extrinsic motivation plus intrinsic motivation equals successful learners. So let's dig into that a little bit. Take, for example, the following activities. We've got 2 lines, questions with a scale, a goal sheet. Each have an instructional task that is asked of the student. And that can be intrinsically motivating. Each ask prompts the student and engages their brain in a different way. Take a look. Notice that the questions go beyond the content themselves and are connecting our students to an emotional response. Remember, that's what's going to help it stick in their brain. So, our brain is intrigued. They're going to read that ask again and hopefully be more motivated. Here are some additional activities. Remind by asking, provide choice, and encourage collaboration. If you take a look here, you'll notice that there are built-in motivators for each of the asks. Take a moment to pause if you want to take a closer look. At this point in our virtual learning reality, we need to inject some motivation, but also maintain momentum. So think about something you tried to learn, really anything in your past, something that maybe wasn't that easy at first. For me, I remember the game of paddleball. It is simple, but if you've ever tried it, you know it takes a lot of practice. But what makes us keep trying, even if we fail? What makes us keep coming back, even if we're not successful right away? Is it because it's a game? The concept behind gameplay has impacted motivation for our virtual learners in a tremendous way, both keeping that motivation and that momentum. So if you haven't heard of gamification, it's been out there for a while. We really need to talk about it in depth because there's a lot of misconceptions. I get questions from educators all the time. Will gamification really help my learners learn? Or is gamification all about having fun? Can it really drive learner performance? Does gamification offer tangible gain or value, or are they just sitting around playing a game? The fact remains that the success of any learning strategy is determined by the effectiveness of its application. So if you craft a gamification concept that captures or retains the learner's attention, that challenges and engages them, ensure that they complete that journey and it teaches them, you have a really high impact training there that you indeed have delivered with the desired impact. Because our research says that 80% of learners claimed learning would be more productive if it were game-oriented. It's a huge percentage. 67% of students reported that a gamified course was more motivating than traditional teaching methods. Plus, the versatility of gamification for learners enables us as educators to use it at various levels of learning, those different cognitive levels. And we can use it not only for learning acquisition, but also for practice and performance improvement, for upskilling, for successful application of learning at work, and really getting that content to stick in our long-term memories. So let's unpack what gamification really is, because it's not about sitting and playing a game with the content, but about implementing game strategies into our lessons. So these are the elements of gamification. Many teachers I talk with correlate just gamification as turning a lesson into entertainment. That's not what it's about. We won't get that same level of motivation or momentum if we just turn it into something flashy and fun. We really want to see those higher levels of cognitive thinking reached. So to meet these gains, the majority of solutions under gamification for a learner follows these 8 elements. And to help you understand these 8 elements, we really want to focus on those learning goals. So I've highlighted the value of each of these elements by mapping it to an equivalent technique for virtual learning. So for example, if we look at instant feedback, we've talked about feedback already. If the learner's journey is driven by scenarios or challenges and they are gaining proficiency, our feedback is going to reinforce that, refresh that learning as they go, and keep them excited and motivated. If we want to use badges, for example, these are benchmarks. These are digital badges of honor that have indicated that they've reached levels or tasks. Badges can be uplifting, it can enhance motivation, it can get students to try and try again so that they can get as many as possible. Depending on the age of your students, this can be very effective and motivating. Healthy competition can be leveraged as well, helping that learner to assess where they stand against their peers in order to support their learning, but also support one another. Opportunities for collaboration, team event, small group learning, so they can work together to meet shared goals. So these elements can be woven into our instruction, especially in the virtual space, especially in our learning management platforms, where we can use our tools and resources to really help students see their learning in a different way and uptick that motivation and engagement. Attached to the resources with this video are additional examples of ways that you can use games to enhance your content learning, using the concepts of charades or Pictionary to enhance your lessons, using categories, lip sync battles. Believe it or not, there are linked to additional resources that can help you think outside the box when it comes to your lessons and instruction and help increase that level of engagement as well. I have one more crucial thing for you to think about. How are you doing? If you're not motivated, it's going to be very hard for your students to be. Be sure to remember self-care and create strategies to keep yourself on course as well. Perhaps it's identifying a workspace that inspires you and keeps you motivated. Making sure that your work schedule and your life schedule are not in conflict with one another. Have you found an accountability partner, an educator that you can lean on for support? It's going to make all the difference. And I find that setting timers can remind me to take regular breaks throughout the day, to sit up, to move around, to take a break from looking at my screen. All of these are small ways that you can help keep yourself motivated. Now that we've reached the end of the video, be sure to capture any final takeaways, notes, and questions so that you can come ready to talk to other virtual school educators during our synchronous webinar. Our synchronous webinar will be February 23rd at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.